Hey folks, welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to talk about one of the awesome runtime features that is shipped in version 0.5.0. This is the work of Patrick Vawak. It's an absolutely amazing feature, which is the ability to write data from an external source into Isograph, and then essentially yield to Isograph to render your component tree. So you might want to do this in a variety of circumstances. One of those is if you're incrementally migrating. So you might, for example, write some data from REST or whatever into the store and render some leaf component using Isograph. And then you work your way up and work your way up and work your way up, and eventually you get sort of to the root of the page. And at that point in time, you can just completely sub out this REST request with a GraphQL request. I mean, this is really nice because on the one hand, you get type safety every single layer, every single step of the way. And secondly, you don't end up making two network requests. So one network request for REST data and one network request for GraphQL data, and thus allowing you to sort of keep good performance, not overloading your backend, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's one scenario you would use this. Another scenario you would use this is if you don't have a GraphQL endpoint that's ready, or maybe some fields are missing. So you have a REST endpoint that provides all of the data, or TRPC, or whatever, and you will make that request, translate it into the GraphQL shape, and then write that into Isograph. That's what we're going to be doing in this demo today. And a third scenario you might be using this is if you have data coming from some other external source. So for example, a set of server sent events. You might have a subscription set up somewhere, and every time something happens, you write that data into the Isograph store, and everything stays, up to date and recent. Up to date and consistent, that's what I meant to say. And alternatively, if you're writing data into local storage or you have some other source of data and you want to be able to write it into the Isograph store. Okay, so the API is write data, is the name of the function. And what's nice about it is that it provides a completely type-safe way to do this. It integrates extremely well with all of the other, it uses the same primitives. So you can, for example, integrate it with garbage collection, unretain the data, so over time your app doesn't get bloated and use more memory than it should, and so on and so forth. Basically, it provides a really good upgrade path. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. I've prepared a screen here. All it does is show this REST endpoint demo thing, and it has this function to make a REST request, which is just a promise that resolves after 2000 milliseconds, which returns a list of pets, and this pet name list, Isograph component client field that we want to render. So one thing you'll notice is that we actually select first and last name. We provide first and last name, but we select full name, and that's because full name is itself another Isograph client field. So basically what I want to show with this is that you write data in and it works with this entire tree of Isograph components. Okay, so let's go ahead and start modifying. Actually, first I'll show you this. It just shows REST endpoint demo. Not particularly useful. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an entry point. So an entry point here is just a way to instruct Isograph to generate the query text and generate the raw response type and so on and so forth. And Isograph or TypeScript picks up on that after a few seconds, and the red squiggly goes away. So at this point in time, we have pet name list / raw response type, and this is the type of data that we need to provide. Now in our case, the REST response already exactly matches this, so we're not going to do any extra transformation, but in practice you would probably want to do some extra transformation. Okay, so what is this type? Let's go ahead and pass it here so that everybody knows the type of this thing. Okay, great, it works. And let's go ahead and now call useEffect. So you can fetch your REST data in whatever way you want. In this case, I'm just doing what's sort of the most convenient. Make REST request, and then REST data. Okay, so we have some REST data. Let's actually go ahead and import this guy. And this REST data, we need to write it into the store. So there's this write data API, and this takes the environment. So const environment use Isograph environment, and then it takes the entry point then it takes the rest data, then it takes the variables. So in this case, we're not providing any variables, so we don't need to provide any variables at this point in time. Great. This will write the data into the store, and now anything that is depending upon that data will automatically re-render. But of course, nothing is depending on that data. We aren't rendering anything. So the thing we should do at this point in time is to use a hook, use updatable disposable state. So this is a hook that safely manages state that needs to be torn down after it's done being used. So in this demo, it doesn't really matter because we're only making a request once. But in practice, when you write data into the store, what we give you is a fragment reference, and that fragment reference is so-called retained. And that means that the data that it refers to will never be garbage collected. And you want to dispose of that when you navigate to another page so that when you run garbage collection, you can get rid of that data. And the reason you want to do this is because otherwise your app is going to use more and more memory over time. This is what I mean by the write data API integrates really well with the other Isograph primitives. And it gives you a lot of stuff that you don't think you need, but in practice you actually probably do. Compare this, for example, to your typical Redux or what have you implementation. Well, the size of the Redux store will just grow without bound over time as somebody uses your app. That's a bit unfortunate. It's really nice that Isograph gives you all this stuff sort of out of the box and allows your app to stay performant and snappy even as people use it for long periods of time and so on and so forth. So we'll call it use updatable disposable state. This will take a type parameter because this being TypeScript, you need to provide the type parameter at the call site. And it will not infer the type parameter from here when we call set state. Compare that to something like Flow, which would infer the type, and it would be quite nice. But in TypeScript, we have to provide that ourselves. Okay, so what is the type? Well, the type is the disposable state, the type of the disposable state, and that is going to be fragment reference of entry point, and then type of entry point. Okay, great. So now that we've provided that type, well, set state type checks because write data gives you a fragment reference and a disposal function for that fragment reference. And state now is either this special sigil unassigned state or is a fragment reference. Okay, so let's go ahead and use that. So the first thing we'll do is state equals to unassigned state. If so, then we'll just show a loading screen, and otherwise we'll go ahead and render the fragment. So in this case, we're going to wrap it in suspense. We don't really need to do that because we're writing all the data into the store and there's no possibility of suspense, but let's be good citizens and do exactly that. Okay, so we'll say loading, and then we're going to render it with fragment renderer. Fragment renderer is a convenience component that just takes this fragment reference, which has to have the type of a component, and renders that component for you. Okay. Fragment reference equals state. Okay, and then let's go ahead and do that. So now, what's happening? This component will render, it will mount, the effect is called, we'll make the network request, and after 2 seconds, we'll set the state and write the data into the store. Then this component will re-render. It will stop showing this loading screen, but instead try to render this fragment renderer, and that will render this pet name list. So it will show a list of pets. So let's go ahead and see that in action. All right, well, it did that in advance, but yeah, there we go. We see that. Okay, great. So let's actually expand upon this a little bit. One thing we can do here is select other subcomponents. Now, a thing that we don't want is for these subcomponents to break at runtime, but not give us any type errors. Well, not coincidentally, we see some type errors because the raw response type has changed. In this case, we need to provide the picture. Okay, so let's go ahead and provide a good picture for each of these. Let me just say images, Mr. Bigglesworth. All right. Copy image address. Everyone's going to have the name, the image of Mr. Bigglesworth. Cool. So now we can go ahead and render the avatar right here. pet.avatar. I have no idea if it'll look nice inside of the inside of an H2, but we'll see. Okay, so why is this failing to type check? That's because we expect to pass an onClick parameter to avatar. If we, for example, get rid of this, then this will fail to type check here, of course, but now this type checks well on the left side. So let's go ahead and put it back and pass an onClick. In this case, we actually don't really care about any of this, so we don't really care. Okay, great. Yeah, so now let's go ahead and see a bunch of Mr. Bigglesworths. Oh, you know what? The avatar doesn't actually do exactly what I thought it does. Let me show you what it does. It shows you this avatar with data.picture. Wait, that might actually be correct. What is avatar? Avatar MUI material. Yeah, okay. Why are we not able to load? Let's see, what are we trying to do? Yeah, okay, because I'm getting some weird stuff here, and I don't want that. So let me go ahead and do this. And we'll see if this time it actually loads the correct stuff. Hey, there we go. All of the pets look identical to Mr. Bigglesworth. He must have done something sneaky with the database and corrupted the data. All right, so what do we do today? We explored write data. Write data is a way of taking arbitrary data and writing it into the Isograph store, and then having Isograph sort of deal with all of the rendering from then on out. And you might use this in a variety of circumstances. One is if you're incrementally adopting Isograph. Two is if you do not have a GraphQL backend that's ready and you want to sort of do more UI work before the backend is ready. And third, you might want to use it if you have some external source of data. So for example, a set of server-sent events or local storage or what have you, and you want to write that into the Isograph store. Yeah, can't wait to see what you build with this. And see you at the next video when we're going to talk about optimistic responses. All right, cheers.